3 days later, Karen stood at her kitchen window, watching the Henderson house through her imported lace curtains. Her mouth had finally stopped burning, but her pride still smoldered. She'd spent hours researching ghost peppers online. Apparently, they were one of the world's hottest peppers, measuring over 1 million Scoville heat units. The research had only fueled her indignation. Weaponized vegetables, she muttered, adjusting her HOA president badge on her blazer. Completely inappropriate for a family neighborhood. The doorbell rang, interrupting her surveillance. Karen opened it to find Bill Henderson standing on her porch, holding a tablet and wearing the kind of gentle smile that immediately put her on guard. "Good morning, Karen. I hope you're feeling better." Karen's stomach dropped, but she maintained her practiced HOA authority voice. "I'm not sure what you mean, Bill. Is there something I can help you with?" "Well, I thought you might want to see this before I decide what to do with it." He turned the tablet toward her, and Karen watched herself on the screen, clear as day, helping herself to his tomatoes and then dramatically consuming his ghost pepper. The blood drained from her face. I was conducting an inspection. The HOA bylaws clearly state, "Karen, you were stealing my vegetables." Bill's voice remained calm, but firm. For weeks, according to the camera logs, the pepper incident was just the most recent. Karen's mind raced through her options. Daniel was clearly off the table. Legal threats might work, but Bill had been a lawyer before retirement. Her best bet was to flip the script entirely. "Those peppers are a public safety hazard," she said, her voice rising with renewed confidence. "Do you realize what could have happened if a child had eaten one? I was actually protecting the community by testing them myself. You should be thanking me." Bill stared at her for a long moment. You're actually trying to make yourself the victim here." "I'm the HOA president, Bill. It's my responsibility to ensure community safety. Those ghost peppers violate at least 3 neighborhood guidelines regarding hazardous materials." "Which guidelines?" Karen paused. She was making them up as she went, but she'd been creative with HOA rules before. Section 4.2, regarding dangerous plants. Section 7.1 about community welfare, and obviously Section 12.3 concerning attractive nuisances that could harm children. Bill scrolled through something on his tablet. "Karen, I have the actual HOA bylaws right here. There is no Section 12.3. Section 7.1 is about holiday decorations, and Section 4.2 just says residents can't plant invasive species." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Karen could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "Nevertheless," she said finally, "I'll be calling an emergency HOA meeting to address this safety concern. The board needs to know about your reckless gardening practices." Bill nodded slowly. "You do that, Karen, and I'll bring my security footage to share with everyone." After he left, Karen slumped against her closed front door. Dave emerged from the kitchen, having heard the entire conversation. "Maybe you should just apologize," he suggested gently. "Bill's a reasonable guy. This doesn't have to get bigger." Karen straightened her blazer. "Apologize? I'm the elected representative of this community's standards and safety. If I back down now, what's next? People will think they can plant anything they want. Poison ivy hedges, deadly nightshade flower beds. Karen, it's a pepper. It's a principle, Dave." But that night, as Karen lay awake staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the image of herself on that security footage, red-faced, desperate, and clearly stealing. For the first time in years, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd gone too far. The emergency HOA meeting was called for Saturday morning at the community center, and Karen had spent 3 days preparing her presentation. She printed charts about Scoville ratings, researched local ordinances, and even found a few dubious internet articles about garden safety hazards. Her plan was simple: make the ghost peppers the villain, position herself as the hero who discovered the danger, and bury the theft issue under an avalanche of community concern. What she hadn't expected was the turnout. Nearly 60 residents packed the small meeting room, more than had attended any HOA meeting in the past 5 years. Word had spread about the security footage, and Karen realized with growing dread that people weren't here to support her crusade against dangerous vegetables. "Thank you all for coming," Karen began, her voice slightly higher than usual. "We're here today to address a serious safety concern in our community." She clicked to her first PowerPoint slide. Host PPPARs, a clear and present danger. A few people snickered. Karen pressed on. "These so-called ghost peppers measure over 1 million Scoville units, making them potentially lethal to children, pets, and unsuspecting adults." She gestured toward the Hendersons, who sat in the front row looking bemused. "The cultivation of such dangerous plants in our family-friendly community represents a clear violation of our safety standards." Margaret Foster, a retired teacher who'd lived in Willowbrook for 30 years, raised her hand. "Karen, honey, are you seriously trying to ban peppers?" "Not peppers, Margaret. Weaponized peppers. There's a significant difference." Bill Henderson stood up slowly. "May I respond to these accusations?" Karen's palms began to sweat. "Well, I suppose that's only fair." Bill connected his tablet to the room's projector. "I think everyone should see exactly how Karen discovered these dangerous peppers." The room fell silent as the security footage played on the large screen. There was Karen, clear as day, systematically harvesting vegetables from the Hendersons' garden. The gasps from the audience were audible when she bit into the ghost pepper, and a few people actually laughed at her frantic dash toward the garden hose. "This footage shows 3 weeks of what I can only call theft," Bill said calmly. "Karen has been taking vegetables from our garden during her morning walks." The room erupted in whispers. Karen felt her face burning almost as hot as it had from the pepper. That was investigative work," she stammered. "I was gathering evidence of the safety hazard by eating stolen peppers," called out Jim Morrison from the back row. Karen looked around the room at faces that ranged from disappointed to amused to outright angry. These were her neighbors, people she'd cited for minor violations, people whose lives she'd made more difficult with her strict interpretation of every HOA rule. "I've been protecting this community for 8 years as your president," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Everything I do is for the greater good of Willowbrook Estates." "Including stealing vegetables?" asked Mrs. Chen. The question hung in the air like smoke. Karen realized that this moment would define not just her presidency, but how she'd be remembered in this community. She could double down, fight harder, create more rules and restrictions to assert her authority. Or, "I made a mistake," she said quietly. The room went silent. I started taking a few vegetables because I was jealous. The Hendersons' garden is beautiful and mine always fails. It started small, just a tomato here and there, and then it became a habit. When I ate the pepper, I was embarrassed and angry, and I tried to turn it into that problem instead of taking responsibility for mine." Bill Henderson looked surprised. Dave, sitting in the back row, looked proud. "I think I should step down as HOA president," Karen continued, "and I owe Bill and Ruth a sincere apology, and probably reimbursement for their vegetables." The applause started slowly, with Mrs. Chen, then spread through the room. It wasn't mocking, it was relieved, even respectful. But as Karen gathered her papers and prepared to leave, she noticed something troubling. Through the community center window, she could see the Morrisons' dog, Rex, running loose in the common area, a clear violation of the leash law that everyone seemed to be ignoring in light of her resignation. She paused at the door, watching the violation unfold, her fingers twitching toward the citation pad in her purse. Old habits, after all, die hard. Karen Whitmore's perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around the largest tomato she'd ever seen, her heart racing with the familiar thrill of her morning ritual. The 47-year-old HOA president had been borrowing from the Hendersons' garden for 3 weeks now, and the rush never got old. Another violation for an unlocked garden gate, she whispered to herself, plucking a handful of cherry tomatoes and stuffing them into her designer purse. Really, the homeowner's manual is quite clear about security measures. She'd discovered the Hendersons' prize-winning vegetable garden during one of her routine property inspections, a fancy term for her daily prowling through Willowbrook Estates. The elderly couple had won the county fair's Best Garden Award 3 years running, and Karen couldn't stand it. Her own attempts at gardening had resulted in nothing but brown patches and the neighbors snickering behind their perfectly aligned fence panels. "The pepper plants are coming along nicely," she muttered, examining a cluster of small wrinkled peppers that looked almost ornamental. She'd been watching them ripen for days, noting how Mr. Henderson handled them with gloves. Probably just being overly cautious about dirt, she reasoned. Karen bit into one of the smaller peppers, expecting the mild sweetness of a bell pepper. For exactly 2 seconds, she thought she'd chosen perfectly. Then her mouth exploded. The burning sensation started as a tingle, escalated to a torch, and within moments felt like she'd swallowed liquid fire. Her eyes streamed tears that she couldn't control, her nose ran like a faucet, and her perfectly applied lipstick began to melt under the assault of her own saliva. "Oh God, oh God, oh God," she gasped, dropping her purse and scattering stolen vegetables across the Hendersons' pristine lawn. She stumbled toward their garden hose, her throat closing as if someone had filled it with molten metal. But the hose was locked with a combination padlock, another security violation she'd planned to cite them for. Karen ran toward her own house 3 doors down, her heels clicking frantically on the sidewalk as neighbors began to emerge from their homes. Mrs. Chen from across the street stopped watering her flowers to stare. The Morrison twins paused their bike ride to point and giggle. "Emergency." Karen wheezed at her husband Dave through their front door. "Milk, ice, call poison control." Dave, a patient man who'd learned to navigate his wife's dramatics over their 20-year marriage, looked at her tear-streaked face and streaming nose with genuine concern. "What happened? Did you get pepper sprayed?" "Something like that," Karen gasped, pushing past him toward the kitchen. She yanked open the refrigerator, grabbed the milk carton, and began chugging directly from it, a behavior that would have horrified her under normal circumstances. The burning sensation slowly subsided from volcanic eruption to house fire, but Karen's mind was already working. This was obviously some kind of trap. The Hendersons had planted dangerous, possibly illegal plants in their garden. There were probably city ordinances against growing hazardous vegetation in residential areas. As she sat at her kitchen island, still hiccuping from the pepper's assault, Karen began planning her next move. She was the HOA president after all. It was her duty to protect the community from dangerous gardening practices. What she didn't know was that the Henderson security camera had captured everything.